The morning fog rolled through San Francisco like a living thing that March of 1937, and our riveter watched it from his boarding house window while nursing black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. You see, he was the sort of man who got lost in observing patterns, the way condensation formed on glass, how the ferry schedules aligned with the tides, the particular rhythm of Mrs. Henley's footsteps overhead as she prepared breakfast for her 3 boarders. At 42, he had hands that told stories better than his mouth ever could. Each callus had been earned through 24 years of driving hot rivets into cold steel, starting when he was just 18 and thought himself immortal. Now he knew better. The small burn scar on his left thumb reminded him of his 3rd week on the job. The crooked index finger spoke of a beam that shifted unexpectedly in 1929, the same year the influenza took Margaret. "You're going to be late," Mrs. Henley called through his door, though he never was. Punctuality was a religion to him, same as checking every rivet twice and reading the engineering manuals other workers used to prop up wobbly table legs. The ferry ride to the construction site took 43 minutes when the bay was calm, 51 when choppy. Today fell somewhere in between. He stood at the rail, lunch pail in hand, watching the great bridge take shape through the mist. The Bay Guardian Bridge, they were calling it, though most of the crew just called it the job. Already the towers rose like ancient monuments to modern ambition, and between them, the roadway crept outward from both shores, not yet meeting in the middle. Frank Kowalski found him there, as he always did. 6 years they'd been partners now, Frank handling the furnace while he drove the rivets home. "You hear about the accident yesterday?" Frank asked, crossing himself. The Polish immigrant still carried old-world superstitions in his tool bag, alongside his work gloves. "Which one?" our riveter replied, because there had been 3 that week alone. The construction site revealed itself as the fog lifted, a vast choreography of controlled chaos. Cranes swung beams that weighed more than houses. Welders sent cascades of sparks into the morning air. And everywhere, the sound of hammering, drilling, shouting, the symphony of progress, some called it, though he thought it sounded more like barely controlled disaster. Tommy Chen was waiting by their station, eager as a puppy despite his 19 years. The kid had good hands, steady nerves, but he watched the older men like he was trying to memorize their every move. Smart boy. His family ran a restaurant in Chinatown, but Tommy had bigger dreams than wontons and chow mein. He wanted to build things that would outlast them all. "Morning, sir," Tommy said, because he couldn't break the habit, despite being told to drop the formality. "You eat breakfast?" our riveter asked, knowing the answer. Tommy often skipped meals to save money, sending most of his wages home. Without waiting for a response, he pulled out half his sandwich, leftover meatloaf from Mrs. Henley's Sunday dinner. "Can't work on an empty stomach, not up here." They climbed to their section, 200 feet above the water. At this height, the wind had teeth. You learned to lean into it, to make it part of your balance rather than fight it. Old Pete was already there, securing his safety line with the methodical care of someone who'd seen too many men trust their luck instead of their equipment. 63 years old and still climbing like a monkey, Frank muttered, though with admiration. Pete had worked on half the bridges between here and Chicago. He'd been on the Quebec Bridge when it collapsed in 1923, killing 14 men. The experience had turned his hair white overnight, or so he claimed. Big Jim Morrison strutted through their section around 10, his foreman's helmet too clean for anyone's comfort. "We're behind schedule, boys," he announced, though they weren't. Head office wants this section done by Friday. That's 4 days for what should take 6, Angelo Teresi observed. The crew chief had a way of stating facts that sounded like accusations. He'd been organizing the men lately, talking about union protection, safety standards, dangerous talk that made Big Jim's jaw clench. Our riveter focused on his work, but his mind cataloged everything. The way certain beams hummed in the wind, the pattern of rust on the older sections, the nervous glances exchanged when Big Jim mentioned the next section they'd be working on, Section B-47, where 2 men had already been injured. During lunch break, he sat apart from the others, reading a technical manual on metal fatigue. The pages were worn from library use, margins filled with someone else's pencil notes. He was comparing stress coefficients when a shadow fell across the page. "Never seen a riveter read so much," Dr. Sarah Whitman observed. She was the safety inspector's assistant, one of maybe 3 women on the entire project. 34 years old, with engineer's eyes that missed nothing. "Never seen a safety inspector in a skirt," he replied, then caught himself. "Apologies, ma'am." She laughed, a sound that cut through the construction noise. "I've heard worse. Much worse." "You're the one who reported the loose bolts on section C12? He nodded. Others had seen them too, but reporting meant paperwork, meant maybe getting labeled a troublemaker. He didn't care about labels, only about men going home to their families. The afternoon brought news that made everyone uneasy. Another accident, this time on the section they'd be moving to next week. A riveter had sworn the beam screamed at him, actually screamed, just before his partner lost his footing. Saved by the safety net, thank God, but rattled enough to quit on the spot. "Probably the wind," our riveter said, when Frank brought him the story. "Wind doesn't sound like that," Frank insisted. "Joey said it was like a banshee. His grandmother was Irish, he knows the sound." Superstition spread through construction crews like influenza through tenements. Our riveter had seen it before, men refusing to work on certain days, carrying lucky charms, creating elaborate rituals to ward off disaster. Usually there was something real underneath, something observable and fixable, but telling scared men about metal resonance and structural harmonics was like speaking Latin to a dog. Monday arrived with clear skies and a nervous energy that rippled through the work crew like electricity through copper wire. Section B-47 awaited them, the beam everyone whispered about in the ferry line, the one Joey Martinelli had fled from 3 days prior. Our riveter arrived early, wanting to examine it before the circus of workers and equipment made observation impossible. The beam itself looked ordinary enough. Standard I-beam construction, 40 feet long, weighing perhaps 3 tons. The manufacturer's stamp read, "Continental Steel, Pittsburgh," same as hundreds of others on the bridge. Yet something felt different when he placed his palm against the cold metal. A subtle wrongness in the texture, like touching a fever patient's forehead when you expected normal temperature. Tommy Chan arrived next, young face tight with determination. "My mother wanted me to call in sick," he admitted. "She heard the stories from Mrs. Wong at the market." "Stories travel faster than truth," our riveter replied, though he kept his hand on the beam, feeling for something he couldn't quite name. By 8 o'clock, the full crew had assembled, minus 2 men who developed convenient cases of stomach flu. Frank Kowalski stood 10 feet from the beam, clutching a small wooden cross his wife had pressed into his palm that morning. Even Angelo Teresi, usually unflappable, seemed edgier than normal. Right then, Big Jim Morrison's voice boomed across the platform. "Enough of this nonsense. And it's a beam, not a beast. Chen, you're up first with the rivet gun." The kid's face went pale, but he stepped forward. Our riveter moved with him, partly from duty as the senior man, partly from genuine concern. They positioned themselves at the beam's eastern joint, where it needed to be connected to the main structure. Tommy powered up the pneumatic gun, its familiar rat-tat-tat filling the morning air. Then it happened. The sound started low, almost below hearing, like the rumble before an earthquake. As Tommy's rivet gun pressed against the metal, the beam began to sing. No, wail. A sound that raised every hair on our riveter's neck. It wasn't human, couldn't be human, yet it carried all the anguish of a widow's grief. The sound pierced through ear protection, through skull, straight into the primitive part of the brain that screamed, "Run!" Tommy jerked backward, lost his footing on the platform's edge. Our riveter's hand shot out, grabbing the kid's belt, hauling him back as his tools went tumbling into the safety net below. The rivet gun fell silent. The beam stopped screaming. "Mother of God," Frank whispered in Polish, then English, then Polish again. Big Jim's face had gone red, though whether from anger or fear was hard to say. "Just resonance," he barked. "Metal vibration. Get back to work." But Tommy was shaking, and not from the near fall. Our riveter felt it too. That sound had been wrong on a level that went beyond superstition. He'd heard metal sing before, heard it groan and whistle and hum. This was different. This was metal in distress, maybe even in pain, if such a thing were possible. "Give us 5 minutes," Angelo said to Big Jim. It wasn't a request. While the others huddled together, sharing cigarettes and prayers in equal measure, our riveter circled the beam like a detective examining a crime scene. He noticed things. The color was slightly off, more gray than the blue-black of proper steel. When he tapped it with his wrench, instead of a clear ring, it produced a dull thud, and there, barely visible unless you knew to look, a hairline pattern in the metal surface that shouldn't exist in properly forged steel. Dr. Whitman appeared on the platform, having heard the commotion from 2 sections over. "Was that the sound they've been talking about?" she asked, and he noticed she'd gone pale too. "You heard it from Section D? I imagine they heard it in Oakland." She approached the beam with scientific curiosity, overcoming caution. "May I?" She produced a small notebook, began sketching the beam's position, making notes. Big Jim stormed over. "This is a construction site, not a university, Miss Whitman." "Dr. Whitman," she corrected. "And safety inspection is exactly why I'm here." They locked eyes, and our riveter saw something pass between them. Big Jim knew something, and Dr. Whitman suspected it. Work resumed, but tentatively. They discovered the beam only screamed at certain frequencies, specifically when the rivet gun hit between 1100 and 1300 rotations per minute. Below that range it merely hummed unpleasantly. Above it, nothing. So they worked slower, much slower, which made Big Jim pace like a caged bear. During lunch, old Pete shared his own theory. "Saw something similar in Cleveland 28 years back." Beam had a crack inside, invisible from outside. When it finally went, took 3 men with it. "This isn't Cleveland," Big Jim interrupted, having overheard. "And I'll dock pay from anyone spreading panic." But our riveter was thinking about harmonics, about the physics he'd read in those library books. Every object had a resonant frequency, the pitch at which it naturally wanted to vibrate. Soldiers broke step crossing bridges because rhythmic marching could match a bridge's frequency and tear it apart. Opera singers could shatter wine glasses with the right note, and a flawed beam, one with internal fractures or improper crystalline structure, might produce exactly this kind of sound when excited at its resonant frequency. Tommy worked the afternoon shift at the opposite end of the beam, careful to keep the gun's speed low. The kid had recovered his nerve, but our riveter noticed how he flinched each time the metal produced even its quieter hum. Frank had stopped making jokes entirely, working in grim silence. Near quitting time, it happened again. Another crew working with a different pneumatic tool hit the wrong frequency. The scream erupted, so sudden and piercing that Martinez, working 30 feet away, lost his grip on a hot rivet. It bounced off 2 beams before landing in the net, leaving a smell of scorched rope in its wake. "That's it," Angelo announced. "We're done for today." "You work until I say you're done," Big Jim shot back. "You want to explain to Martinez's wife why he fell? You want that on your conscience?" The 2 men stood chest to chest, and for a moment our riveter thought punches might fly. But old Pete stepped between them. "Sun's getting low anyway. Bad light means bad work." Big Jim backed down, but his expression promised consequences. As the crew packed up, our riveter lingered, watching the beam in the fading light. It looked innocent now. Just another piece of steel waiting to become part of something larger. But he knew better. This beam was sick, maybe dying, and forcing it into the bridge would be like putting a cancer cell into a healthy body. That night at the boarding house, he sketched diagrams on the back of old newspapers, trying to visualize what might be happening inside the metal. Mrs. Henley brought him soup he didn't remember to eat. From upstairs, he heard her radio playing swing music, the sound thin and tinny through the floorboards. His daughter would visit Sunday, 16 years old, smart as a whip, working at a dress shop but dreaming of bigger things. He'd have to pretend everything was normal, wouldn't mention the beam or the sound it made. She worried enough about his job already. Margaret would have known how to handle it, would have found the right words. But Margaret was 8 years gone, and he was still learning to be both parents at once. Tuesday morning brought our riveter back to section B47 2 hours before his shift, carrying a borrowed stethoscope he'd gotten from Mrs. Henley's nephew, a medical student who owed him a favor. The platform was empty except for seagulls that scattered at his approach. He pressed the cold metal disc against the beam at various points, listening to its internal music. Every piece of steel had its own signature, he'd learned. Good steel sang clear and true. This beam whispered secrets, little catches and murmurs that suggested fractures or voids deep within. He made careful notes in pencil on the back of an envelope, marking positions where the sound changed, grew duller or sharper. "Early morning examination?" Dr. Whitman's voice didn't startle him. He'd heard her footsteps on the ladder. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, showing her the stethoscope. She produced her own instrument, a small hammer used for testing reflexes. "Great minds, apparently." Together, they worked in companionable silence, she tapping, he listening, both mapping the beam's hidden geography. By the time the crew arrived, they'd covered their tools and stood apart, discussing the weather with studied casualness. Big Jim's eyes narrowed at seeing them together, but he said nothing. The morning's work proceeded slowly, everyone treating the beam like an unexploded shell from the Great War. Wednesday's fog was thick enough to muffle sound, which made working near the beam almost pleasant. They'd found a rhythm: keep the tools slow, take frequent breaks, never work the same spot too long. Tommy had even developed a technique of varying his rivet gun's speed in a pattern that seemed to soothe the metal, like petting a nervous horse. During lunch, Angelo gathered the men away from Big Jim's earshot. "I've been talking to the union representatives," he said quietly. "They want documentation, evidence."
"If we can prove unsafe conditions, they'll back us."
"Evidence of what?" Frank asked. "That a beam screams? They'll think we're crazy. Or drunk," Martinez added. But our riveter was thinking about those hairline patterns he'd seen, about the dull sound where there should be ringing. What if we could prove the steel is defective? Angelo's eyes sharpened. "You know something." "Maybe. I need to test it properly." That afternoon, while the others worked, he carefully, secretly, filed away a few metal shavings from an inconspicuous spot on the beam's underside. The metal felt brittle under the file, producing granular dust instead of the long curled ribbons good steel would make. He folded the filings in paper, tucked them in his shirt pocket. Thursday passed in relative calm until old Pete mentioned his retirement plans during break. "3 more months, then I'm done. Bought a little place up in Petaluma. Gonna raise chickens." "You'll be back in a week," Frank laughed. "Can't imagine you away from the steel." But Pete's eyes were distant, seeing something beyond the bridge. 39 years I've been doing this. Seen bridges rise and fall. Seen men die for progress. Time to let younger backs carry the load." The conversation turned to Tommy's family restaurant, which had been having trouble. Windows broken twice this month, mysterious fires in the alley trash cans. Everyone knew it was Mulligan's gang running protection rackets through Chinatown, but knowing and proving were different beasts entirely. "My father wants to pay," Tommy admitted. "Says it's just business cost." "Your father's wrong," Angelo said firmly. "You pay once, you pay forever." Our riveter listened but said nothing, filing the information away with everything else he noticed and remembered. Friday came with news. A delegation of city officials would visit Sunday, when the site was closed to workers but open for public viewing. The mayor himself might come, along with reporters from the Chronicle and Examiner. Big Jim wanted everything perfect, which meant pushing harder on sections that were behind, including B47. "We need to increase pace," he announced. "I want this section completed by tomorrow night." "Can't be done safely," Angelo protested. "Then work unsafe. Your choice." The crew exchanged glances. Our riveter saw the calculation in their faces. Jobs were scarce, families needed feeding, but was steady pay worth your life? He'd made that calculation himself, more times than he could count. They worked faster that afternoon, the rivet guns climbing toward dangerous frequencies. The beam hummed constantly now, an undercurrent of distress that set everyone's teeth on edge. Twice, it approached a scream before operators caught themselves and slowed down. Near quitting time, Dr. Whitman appeared with a man in an expensive suit, someone from the city planning office by his look. They stood watching the work, the suit man asking questions that Dr. Whitman answered carefully, diplomatically. Our riveter caught her eye once, saw worry there despite her professional calm. Saturday arrived gray and damp, the kind of weather that made steel slippery and men cautious. But Big Jim pushed harder than ever. "Tomorrow's the show," he kept saying. "I want this section looking perfect." They were 3/4 done with the beam connections when it happened. A new man transferred from another section didn't know about the frequency problem. His rivet gun roared at full speed, and the beam didn't just scream, it shrieked. A sound like tearing metal and breaking glass, and every nightmare rolled into one. The new man jerked back, slipped on the wet platform. His safety line caught him, but the rivet gun kept going, bouncing against the beam, making it scream louder and louder, until our riveter lunged forward and hit the emergency shutoff. In the sudden silence, they could hear the beam still humming, vibrating like a struck bell. And there, he was sure he saw it. A crack had appeared near one of the joints, hair-thin but visible. "Nobody says nothing," Big Jim commanded, his face white. "Not one word. We finish this today." But our riveter had seen enough. That crack confirmed everything he'd suspected. This beam wasn't just flawed, it was dangerous, maybe catastrophically so. And Big Jim knew it, had probably known it all along. That night, he sat at his boarding house desk with the metal filings, a magnifying glass borrowed from Mrs. Henley, and a chemistry book from the library. The steel's composition was wrong. Too much sulfur, not enough carbon. Impurities that suggested rushed smelting or contaminated ore. This wasn't just bad steel, it was fraudulent steel, passed off as bridge quality when it belonged in a scrap heap. Sunday morning came bright and clear, perfect for the official's visit. Our riveter took the ferry not as a worker, but as a member of the public, his daughter Elizabeth beside him in her best dress. At 16, she had her mother's grace and his stubbornness, a combination that both worried and amazed him. "You're quiet today, Papa," she observed as they approached the construction site. "Just thinking about work." "You're always thinking about work." But she said it fondly, linking her arm through his. The public viewing area was crowded with families, photographers, and men in formal suits. Big Jim stood with the officials, gesturing proudly at the bridge's progress. Our riveter spotted Dr. Whitman in the crowd, notebook in hand, watching everything. The week following the official's visit started with deceptive calm. Monday's morning shift found our riveter studying the crack he'd spotted in the beam, which had grown from hairline to the width of a fingernail over the weekend. He'd covered it with grease and dirt to hide it from casual observation, but knew this was temporary at best. Tommy Chen arrived with a black eye he tried to hide under his cap. "Walked into a door," he said when asked, but our riveter recognized the particular shade of purple that came from a fist, not furniture. "Mulligan's boys?" Angelo asked quietly. Tommy nodded, ashamed. "They came to the restaurant Saturday night. Pop tried to reason with them." The crew worked in subdued mood, everyone aware that the beam's condition was worsening. Every hammer blow produced a slightly different tone than the day before, like a piano slowly going out of tune. Frank had taken to whistling hymns under his breath, a nervous habit that would have been annoying if it weren't so understandable. Around 10:30, Big Jim brought over a group of men in suits, engineers from the steel company by their look. They examined the beam perfunctorily, nodding at whatever Big Jim was telling them. Our riveter caught fragments, minor settling, within tolerances, schedule requirements. Dr. Whitman appeared just as the suits were leaving. "Gentlemen," she called out, "might I have a word about the safety reports?" "All filed properly with the city," one suit replied without stopping. She persisted. "I meant the workers' reports about unusual stress patterns." Big Jim's laugh was forced. "Lady, these men see stress patterns in their soup. That's why we have engineers, to separate fact from fiction." But Dr. Whitman's eyes found our riveters across the platform. He gave the slightest nod. Yes, there was something wrong. She returned it. She knew. Tuesday brought rain, the kind that made every surface treacherous. They worked slowly, carefully, but the beam seemed to protest more than usual, humming even at the lowest tool frequencies. Old Pete kept checking his retirement calendar. 61 days now, marking each one off like a prisoner counting down his sentence.
It was just after lunch when disaster struck. Jerry Kowalski, Frank's cousin, new to the crew, was working the beam's upper section when his rivet gun hit a resonance point nobody had mapped yet. The scream that emerged was different, higher, more anguished. Jerry jerked reflexively. His foot slipped on the wet steel, and suddenly he was falling. Time stretched like taffy. Our riveter saw Jerry's hands grasping at air, saw Frank lunging forward too late, saw the safety line pull taut and snap. The rope had been weakened by that hot rivet days ago, a detail everyone had forgotten. Jerry hit the safety net, but at a bad angle. The sound of breaking bone was audible even over the construction noise. Men scrambled down ladders, shouting for the medical crew. Our riveter reached him first, saw the unnatural angle of Jerry's leg, the white of bone through torn skin. "Don't move," he said, though Jerry was past responding coherently, eyes rolled back in shock. The medical team took 11 minutes to arrive. 11 minutes of Jerry moaning while Frank held his hand and prayed in Polish. They carried him away on a stretcher, and word came back an hour later. Compound fracture of the femur, damaged knee, he'd probably walk again but never climb steel. "This is on you," Angelo told Big Jim quietly, dangerously. "That beam's cursed, and you know it." "Beam's fine," Big Jim replied, but sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool air. "Accident was rope failure. Could have happened anywhere. But it didn't happen anywhere. It happened at the beam that screams." The crew stood behind Angelo, a silent wall of accusation. Big Jim looked at each face, calculating. "Anyone who doesn't want to work can collect their pay and leave. Plenty of men looking for jobs." It was the eternal threat, the one that kept men quiet about unsafe conditions, that made them accept danger as the price of feeding their families. Our riveter had heard it on every job site for 24 years. Usually it worked, but something had shifted. Maybe it was Jerry's blood on the platform, or the accumulation of close calls, or simply the sound the beam made, like suffering given voice. The men didn't disperse. "We want that beam inspected," Angelo said. "Properly inspected. Not by your brother-in-law's company men." Big Jim's face went purple. "You accusing me of something?" "I'm stating facts. Continental Steel is owned by Patrick Morrison. That's public record." The revelation rippled through the crew. Our riveter wasn't surprised. He'd suspected something like this, but others were visibly shocked. Nepotism was common enough, but not when it put lives at risk. That evening, our riveter visited Jerry in the hospital. The man was conscious, doped on morphine, leg in traction. "Heard it scream," Jerry kept saying. "Like my grandmother's stories of banshees." "Heard it scream and knew someone would die." "You didn't die," our riveter pointed out. "Might as well have. Can't work steel with a ruined leg. What's a man without his work?" It was a question our riveter couldn't answer. He'd been defined by his work so long he couldn't imagine himself without it. The smell of hot metal, the satisfaction of a perfect rivet, the brotherhood of men building something permanent. This was his identity as much as his name. Wednesday came with news that made everything worse. The city had accelerated the bridge opening schedule.
The mayor wanted it done before the gubernatorial election, wanted to claim credit for the jobs and progress it represented. That meant cutting 3 months from the timeline, which meant no time to properly replace the beam, even if they could prove it was defective. Dr. Whitman found him during lunch break. "I've been doing research," she said quietly. "Continental Steel has had problems before."
A warehouse collapse in Pittsburgh, a factory fire in Cleveland. Always settled quietly, always blamed on other factors. But you can't prove connection to our beam. Not without metallurgical testing. And to get that, I need a sample. She looked at him meaningfully. He passed her the paper with metal filings folded small. "Don't know where you got these." "Of course not." She pocketed it smoothly. "It'll take a few days to get results. Can you keep the men safe that long?" "I'll try." But Thursday tested that promise. Big Jim brought in extra crews trying to make up lost time. The platform got crowded, men working too close together, tools competing for space. The beam screamed 4 times that day, each incident causing someone to flinch, stumble, drop something. Only luck prevented another serious accident. Tommy was walking home with our riveter when they passed his family's restaurant. Windows boarded up now, "Closed for repairs" sign in English and Chinese. "Pop wants to sell," Tommy said bitterly. "Says it's not worth fighting." "Your Pop's trying to protect you." "By giving up? By letting them win?" Our riveter wanted to offer wisdom, but what could he say? Sometimes fighting got you broken like Jerry. Sometimes surrendering meant survival. The trick was knowing which battle you were in. Friday arrived with Angelo organizing a formal safety complaint. Half the crew signed it, the other half too afraid of losing their jobs. Frank signed, then crossed it out, then signed again. Old Pete refused. 60 days, he kept saying. Just 60 more days. Saturday night found our riveter in the San Francisco Public Library's reading room, surrounded by engineering texts and metallurgy journals. The librarian, Miss Patterson, had stopped raising eyebrows at his requests months ago. Now she simply brought him coffee and reminded him when closing time approached. He was deep in an article about resonant frequency disasters when he found it. An account of the Quebec Bridge collapse of 1907. The description made his blood cold. A compression cord in the south anchor arm had failed due to faulty steel that had shown signs of stress through unusual acoustic properties weeks before the collapse. 75 men dead in seconds. The parallels were too obvious to ignore. He copied the relevant passages in his careful handwriting, then turned to another volume on harmonic vibration in structures. Every object, the book explained, had a natural frequency at which it wanted to oscillate. When external forces matched this frequency, the resulting resonance could tear the object apart. It was physics, pure and simple. But it might as well have been witchcraft for all most people understood it. Sunday, he met Dr. Whitman at a small cafe in the Mission District, far from where construction workers gathered. She slid a folder across the table, her face grave. "The metal filings you gave me," she began. "The sulfur content is 3 times acceptable levels. There are inclusion defects throughout. Slag, gas bubbles, improper grain structure. This steel wouldn't be acceptable for a warehouse, much less a bridge." Our riveter studied the laboratory report. "Can you take this to the city inspectors?" "Not without revealing how I got the sample. And even then, Big Jim would claim it was contaminated, or not from his beam at all."
She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. We need more evidence, documentation of the defects, witness statements, something undeniable. Monday morning brought Tommy to work with good news for once. An anonymous benefactor had paid off Mulligan's gang, told them to leave the Chen family alone. Tommy suspected a wealthy relative from the old country, but our riveter, who'd pawned Margaret's wedding ring that weekend, said nothing. The beam was worse now. The crack he'd been monitoring had grown to nearly an inch. He'd hidden it with fresh paint, but knew Big Jim would spot it soon. The sound it made had changed too. Less scream than death rattle, a grinding resonance that spoke of imminent failure. Angelo gathered the crew during break. I've been in touch with union lawyers. They say we need documented proof of immediate danger to shut down work. Otherwise, it's just our word against the companies. So we document, Frank said, finally finding his courage. We all write down what we've seen, heard, get it notarized. Old Pete shook his head. 58 days. I'm not rocking boats with 58 days left. But that afternoon, even Pete couldn't ignore what happened. They were using a crane to position a connecting beam when the operator accidentally bumped the Banshee beam with the load. The molecular structure is compromised. It could fail under normal load. You're not a city inspector, Big Jim replied. Your opinion means nothing here. My opinion is based on 30 years of studying material failures. That beam is a time bomb. Big Jim's response was to have security escort the professor off the site. Wednesday's Chronicle ran a small item on page 7. Concerns raised about bridge construction steel. Dr. Whitman had leaked just enough to get attention without revealing sources. Big Jim arrived at the site, furious, threatening to fire anyone he caught talking to reporters. But the damage was done. City inspectors arrived that afternoon. Not the usual ones in Big Jim's pocket, but a team from the state level. They examined the beam while our riveter held his breath. Would they see what he saw? Would they have the courage to act on it? The lead inspector, a German immigrant named Schultz, ran his hands along the beam like a doctor examining a patient. He found the crack our riveter had hidden, found 2 more developing, noticed the unusual grain pattern in the metal. His expression grew grimmer with each discovery. Thursday brought the showdown everyone had been expecting. Schultz's team condemned the beam, ordering its immediate removal. Big Jim produced his own inspector's reports, claiming the beam was safe. Lawyers appeared from both sides. Work ground to a halt as legal arguments flew over the workers' heads. Angelo used the confusion to organize. By lunch, he had 90% of the crew ready to strike if the beam wasn't removed. Our riveter didn't join the organizing. He was too busy with his own calculations, determining exactly how much load the beam could take before failing completely. The answer terrified him. According to his figures, they were already past the safety margin. The beam was holding on by habit and luck, nothing more. That evening, Tommy found him at the boarding house. "My father wants to thank you," the young man said quietly. "He knows it was you who paid off Mulligan." "Don't know what you're talking about," Tommy smiled. "He also said a man who'd do that is a man worth following. Whatever you decide about the beam, I'm with you." Our riveter felt the weight of that trust. Tommy was 19, had his whole life ahead of him. Frank had 3 children. Martinez was supporting elderly parents. These men weren't just numbers in his calculations. They were lives that could end because of a decision made in a corporate office to save money on steel. Friday arrived with news that made everything academic. The crane was scheduled to lift the bridge's main suspension cable over their section tomorrow. The cable weighed 40 tons. If the beam failed under that load, it wouldn't just be the workers at risk. The entire section could collapse, potentially taking down portions already completed. Our riveter found Dr. Whitman and Professor Hartley meeting with Schultz at a nearby diner. He laid out his calculations on the table. The four of them studied the numbers in silence. Finally, Schultz spoke. "If you're right, we have less than 24 hours to prevent a disaster." "I'm right," our riveter said simply. He'd never been more certain of anything in his life. The knock on his boarding house door came at 2 in the morning. Our riveter had been awake anyway, running calculations for the third time, hoping he'd made an error, that the situation wasn't as dire as his numbers suggested. But mathematics didn't lie, unlike men. Big Jim Morrison stood in the hallway, looking older than his 51 years in the dim gaslight. "We need to talk," he said, privately. They walked to the empty lot behind the boarding house, where fog rolled in thick sheets between abandoned machinery from some long-ago construction project. Big Jim lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You've been causing me problems," he began. "The beam's been causing problems. I'm just pointing them out." Big Jim laughed bitterly. "You think I don't know? You think I sleep at night, knowing what's up there?" He pulled out a flask, took a long drink, offered it. Our riveter declined. "My brother-in-law's company's going under. Bad investments, worse management. This contract was supposed to save him, save my sister from poverty. So you knowingly installed defective steel." "Not knowingly. Not at first." Big Jim's voice dropped. "By the time we realized it was already up there. To replace it meant admitting fault, meant lawsuits, meant—" he trailed off. "Meant doing the right thing. Easy for you to say. You don't have family depending on you." Our riveter thought of his daughter, of the scholarship she was hoping for, the future he wanted to give her. "I have family. But I also have 48 men who trust me not to get them killed." Big Jim reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope thick with bills. "There's $1,000 here. Take it. Take your family somewhere far away, today, before the cable goes up." $1,000. More money than our riveter would see in 2 years. Enough for Elizabeth's education, enough for a new start somewhere. He held the envelope, feeling its weight, imagining the possibilities it represented. "And my crew? I'll find reasons to delay the lift, give them time to find excuses not to be here. But not tell them why." Big Jim's silence was answer enough. Our riveter handed back the envelope. "Can't do it. 2,000. I can get 2,000 by noon. Not about the money, Jim. Never was." Big Jim's face crumpled. "They'll destroy me. Prison, if I'm lucky. My reputation. My family's name. All of it gone. Better than having 75 deaths on your conscience." Ask the Quebec bridge builders. Saturday morning arrived, gray and humid, the kind of weather that made steel sweat. Our riveter arrived at the site to find chaos. Angelo had organized a full strike, workers standing in groups with hand-painted signs, "Safe steel or no steel." Big Jim was there with company security, trying to force a path for the crane operators. But there were also strangers, hard-looking men who didn't belong on a construction site. Our riveter recognized the type, strikebreakers, hired muscle. This was about to get ugly. Dr. Whitman appeared at his elbow. "Schultz is trying to get an emergency injunction, but the judge won't be available until Monday. Cable lift is scheduled for 2 o'clock.
I know. Frank found them, face flushed with excitement and fear. Angelo says we hold the line. Don't let them near the beam. They'll bring police, our riveter said. Mayor wants this bridge finished.
Police will side with the company. Then we make sure everyone knows why we're striking, Tommy said, appearing with an armload of flyers he'd had printed overnight. They showed a crude drawing of the beam and the words, "Defective steel means death." By noon, reporters had arrived, drawn by the drama. The Chronicle, the Examiner, even photographers from smaller papers. Big Jim tried to keep them back, but Angelo had made sure they knew exactly where to stand for the best view of the confrontation. Old Pete stood apart from both groups, looking miserable. 56 days, he muttered. Couldn't wait 56 more days. At 1:30, police arrived. Not just a few officers, but 24, with paddy wagons waiting. The captain, a thick-necked Irishman named O'Malley, surveyed the situation with professional calm. "You men have 5 minutes to disperse," he announced. "This is an illegal work stoppage." "It's a safety strike," Angelo replied.
"Legal under federal law?" "Not without proper union notification. 5 minutes." Our riveter made a decision. He walked to the beam, climbed onto it, and sat down directly where the crane would need to attach the cable. Frank followed, then Tommy, then one by one other workers until 20 men sat on the beam that had terrorized them for weeks. "You'll have to arrest us all," Angelo called down, "and explain to those reporters why we're willing to risk jail to stop this lift." Big Jim's face was purple. "Get them down! Get them off there!" But even O'Malley hesitated. Arresting striking workers was one thing. Physically dragging them off a beam 200 feet in the air was another. The liability alone would end careers. Professor Hartley chose that moment to arrive with a dramatic flourish. Assistants carrying boxes of equipment.
"Before anyone does anything rash," he announced loudly enough for reporters to hear, "I propose we conduct a public demonstration of this beam's condition." "You have no authority here," Big Jim protested. "No, but I have science, and these gentlemen of the press might be interested in seeing whether the workers' concerns are justified." The reporters pressed closer, sensing a story. O'Malley, recognizing a political nightmare in the making, held back his men. Big Jim looked trapped. Professor Hartley set up his equipment, an oscilloscope, acoustic sensors, a mechanical striker calibrated to specific frequencies. "This will simulate the vibration the beam would experience under load," he explained to the gathering crowd. Our riveter climbed down, pulling the others with him. They needed to be clear when this happened. The professor activated his machinery, and the striker began its rhythmic tapping, climbing through frequencies like a pianist running scales. At first, nothing. Then the familiar hum began, growing louder as the frequency increased. The reporters stepped back instinctively. At 1100 rotations, the beam began its terrible song. Not quite a scream yet, but close. "That's not normal," someone said. Professor Hartley increased the frequency. The scream erupted, that soul-freezing sound that had haunted the workers for weeks. But he didn't stop. He pushed higher, and the scream became a shriek, and then the crack. Audible even over the beam's cry, a sound like breaking bone, amplified 1,000 times. A visible fracture appeared, running 3 feet along the beam's surface, pieces of metal actually flaking off like old paint. The professor shut down his equipment.
In the silence that followed, everyone could hear the beam still resonating, still dying.
That, Professor Hartley announced, is what would happen under the weight of the suspension cable. Except it would be catastrophic, instant, and fatal to anyone nearby. The reporters exploded into action, photographers pushing forward, questions flying. Big Jim tried to speak, but no one was listening. O'Malley quietly ordered his men to stand down. Sunday's newspapers ran the story on their front pages. "Death beam on Bay Bridge," screamed the Chronicle. The Examiner went with "Workers' strike prevents disaster." By noon, City Hall was in emergency session, and our riveter found himself in the unusual position of wearing his only good suit, sitting in a mahogany-paneled room full of politicians and lawyers. Dr. Whitman sat beside him, her testimony clinical and damning. She presented the metallurgical analysis, the inspection reports, the correlation between Continental Steel's other failures and the current crisis. She spoke with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment since she'd first heard the beam scream. "The question," said Councilman Fletcher, a thin man who looked like he'd swallowed something sour, "is how many other beams from Continental Steel are already in place?" The room went silent. It was the question everyone had been avoiding, the possibility that turned a single problem into a potential catastrophe. 17, our riveter said quietly. 17 beams from the same batch are already installed. "How do you know this?" He produced his notebook, months of careful observations recorded in pencil. "I track everything. It's my nature. Serial numbers, installation dates, crew assignments. These 17 all came from Continental's October batch, same as the Banshee. Same as beam B47. Mayor Rossi himself leaned forward. "And are these other beams showing similar problems?" 3 show stress patterns. 2 have developed minor cracks. The rest appear stable, but that could change under load. The implications hung in the air like fog. To replace 20 beams meant months of delays, millions in costs, political careers destroyed. To leave them meant risking lives and the entire bridge's integrity. "We need time to investigate properly," Dr. Whitman said. "Every beam must be tested using Professor Hartley's methods." Monday morning, our riveter was back at the site, but everything had changed. Big Jim was gone, suspended pending investigation, though rumors said he'd already been seen at the train station with a one-way ticket. Federal inspectors swarmed the bridge like ants on spilled sugar, testing every beam, every rivet, every weld. Angelo had been promoted to temporary foreman, his first act being to establish new safety protocols. "Nobody works a beam until it's been certified," he announced. "I don't care if it takes 6 months." Frank stood with the crew, but something was different in his posture. The near disaster had broken something in him, or maybe fixed something that had been broken. "My cousin Jerry's walking," he told our riveter. "With a cane, but walking. Doctors say it's a miracle." "No miracle, just good bones and Polish stubbornness." Frank laughed, but it was shaky. "I almost took Big Jim's money, you know. Thursday night he came to my house. $500 to stay quiet. Mary was there, heard the whole thing. She threw a pot at him. Good cast iron skillet, too." Tommy was working with the federal inspectors, his education and attention to detail making him valuable as a translator between the workers' observations and the engineers' requirements. The kid was learning fast, absorbing everything like a sponge. "They're talking about sending me to engineering school," Tommy said during break. "The feds, I mean. Say they need people who understand both theory and practice. You'll take it? If my family agrees. The restaurant's reopening next week. Pop got a loan from the Chinese Benevolent Association.
Fair terms, no threats. Our riveter nodded, pleased. Some good was coming from this mess after all. Tuesday brought Dr. Whitman with news that Continental Steel was under federal investigation. They found documents, she said quietly. Big Jim kept records of everything. Bribes, falsified inspections, even which batches he knew were defective. He was building a case for protection if things went bad. Guess they went bad. Thanks to you. She studied him with those engineer's eyes. You know, I've never actually asked your name. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. I'm just a riveter. No, she said firmly. You're the man who saved dozens of lives. That matters. Wednesday, the real work of replacement began. The Banshee beam was the first to come down, crews working with almost religious solemnity as they removed each rivet. When the crane finally lifted it away, a cheer went up from the workers, but it was subdued, respectful. The beam had taught them something about trust and vigilance. Old Pete announced he was retiring immediately. 54 days early, but I've seen enough. That beam screaming. It was like death calling my name. Time to go raise those chickens. The crew threw him an impromptu party that evening at Teresa's cousin's restaurant. Stories were told, lies were embellished, and more than a few tears were shed into beer mugs. Our riveter gave Pete a compass he'd carried since his first job. So you can always find your way, he said. Pete gripped his hand hard. You saved us all, you know that? When everyone else was frozen by fear or greed, you kept working the problem. Thursday came with lawyers. Our riveter spent 6 hours giving depositions, describing everything he'd seen, heard, suspected. The federal prosecutor, a young woman named Harrison, was thorough and relentless. You kept very detailed notes, she observed, almost like you expected this. I keep notes on everything. It's how I understand the world. Patterns, connections, systems. A bridge is just a big puzzle. When pieces don't fit, I notice. And Big Jim's attempt to bribe you? Desperate men do desperate things. He wasn't evil, just weak. Chose family over strangers, money over morality. Seen it before, we'll see it again. Friday brought an unexpected visitor. Elizabeth came to the site after her shift at the dress shop, wearing the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. I heard what you did, she said. Everyone's talking about it. Just did my job. No, Papa, you did the right thing. Mama would be proud. They stood together watching the sun set over the bay, the bridge stretching incomplete across the water. In the distance, ships' horns sounded, and the city lights began their evening show. I got accepted, Elizabeth said suddenly. The Catherine Gibbs Secretarial School. They offered me a partial scholarship. That's wonderful. He meant it, though his heart clenched at the thought of her leaving. I couldn't have done it without you, without knowing that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. That evening, our riveter walked through Chinatown to Tommy's family restaurant. The windows were new, the sign freshly painted. Inside, the Chen family worked the dinner rush with practiced efficiency. Tommy's mother insisted he eat for free, wouldn't take no for an answer. The revelation came on a rain-soaked Monday when our riveter was examining purchase orders in the temporary office Angelo had set up. He'd been tracking serial numbers, trying to identify which beams needed immediate replacement, when the pattern emerged like a photograph developing in solution. Continental Steel's defective batches weren't random. They coincided exactly with contracts where Patrick Morrison, Big Jim's brother-in-law, had personally negotiated the deals. But more interesting were the companies that received the good steel during those same periods. Bayside Development, Golden Gate Consortium, Pacific Bridge Partners, shell companies, all of them. But our riveter recognized the names of their registered agents from city planning documents. "It's a web," he told Dr. Whitman that afternoon, spreading papers across her desk like tarot cards. Morrison was selling good steel at premium prices to these shells, then delivering substandard steel to the actual bridge project at the contracted price. Double profit. She studied the documents with growing excitement. This is fraud on a massive scale. But who owns the shell companies? That question consumed Tuesday and Wednesday. Our riveter used his lunch breaks to visit the city records office, where a helpful clerk named Doris, charmed by his quiet politeness, let him dig through incorporation documents. Tommy helped in the evenings, his quick mind perfect for spotting connections others might miss. The answer, when it came Thursday morning, was worse than expected. The shells traced back to a holding company owned by 3 city councilmen and a state senator. The same men who'd pushed for accelerated construction, who'd overridden safety concerns, who'd insisted on using continental steel despite lower bids from other suppliers. "They knew," Tommy said, voice hollow with disbelief. "They all knew. And people could have died." Our riveter felt the weight of this knowledge like a beam across his shoulders. Going after Big Jim was one thing. He was just a foreman, expendable. But these were powerful men, the kind who had judges for poker buddies and prosecutors on payroll. He found Angelo that afternoon, organizing crews for the replacement work. "Need to tell you something," our riveter said, privately. They walked to the edge of the platform where the wind would carry their words away. When our riveter finished explaining, Angelo's face had gone pale beneath his perpetual tan. "Madonna mia," Angelo breathed. "You're talking about taking on half the city government." "I'm talking about the truth. Truth doesn't stop bullets. These men, they don't just fire you, they make you disappear." That evening, someone tried to make Tommy disappear. He was walking home through Chinatown when 3 men cornered him in an alley. Not Mulligan's boys. These were professionals, quiet men with brass knuckles and dead eyes. Only the intervention of the Chen family's neighbors, pouring from their shops with cleavers and rolling pins, saved him from worse than the broken ribs and split lip he suffered. Our riveter found him at the Chinese hospital, his mother weeping in Cantonese, while his father stood stoic and furious. "This is my fault," our riveter said. "No," Tommy replied through swollen lips. "This is their fault. The men who did this, who sent them. We're just in their way." Friday came with Dr. Whitman bearing news. Professor Hartley's been told to cease his investigation. The university suddenly needs him for urgent research elsewhere. They're trying to bury this. But she also brought hope. There's a federal prosecutor in Sacramento, James Dewey. He's been investigating corruption in construction contracts for 2 years. He's interested in our evidence. The meeting was arranged for Saturday, not in any official building, but in a fisherman's bar near the wharf, the kind of place where rough men minded their own business and the sound of sea lions masked conversation. Dewey was younger than our riveter expected, maybe 35, with the intense eyes of someone who'd chosen justice over an easy career.
He listened without interrupting as our riveter laid out the evidence, occasionally making notes in a small leather book. "You've done exceptional work," Dewey finally said, "but I need more. Documents, testimony from Morrison, something that directly links the councilman to knowledge of the defective steel." Big Jim's disappeared. Not disappeared, hidden. My sources say he's at his sister's ranch near Petaluma. Problem is, it's private property. Can't go there without a warrant. Can't get a warrant without probable cause. Old Pete lived near Petaluma now. The thought came unbidden, but once there, it grew. Pete, who knew everyone, who'd worked every job, who could move through the construction world like a ghost because everyone dismissed old men as harmless. Sunday, our riveter took the bus north, watching the city give way to farmland. He found Pete feeding chickens, looking more relaxed than he'd seemed in years. "Knew you'd come eventually," Pete said. "Heard about Tommy. Heard about the investigation dying. Need your help." Pete scattered more feed, watching the birds squabble. "Morrison's sister's place is 2 miles west. Big Jim's there, drunk most of the time, feeling sorry for himself. Sister keeps him hidden, but she goes to town for supplies every Tuesday. And I might know the boy who delivers groceries. Might convince him to let someone ride along, someone who could talk sense into Big Jim about coming forward before the feds find him anyway." Monday was preparation. Our riveter gathered every document he'd copied, every photograph of the defective beams, every piece of evidence that might convince Big Jim that cooperation was his only path to avoiding decades in prison. Tuesday morning found him hidden in the back of a grocery truck, bouncing over rutted roads toward a confrontation he wasn't sure he'd survive. The Morrison Ranch was modest but isolated, perfect for hiding a man who'd become inconvenient to powerful people. Big Jim answered the door himself, unshaven, hollow-eyed, a ghost of the blustering foreman he'd been. His hand went to a pistol in his belt, then dropped. "Should have known you'd find me. We need to talk. Nothing to say. I'm done. Finished. Let 'em all rot, including your sister, because when this comes out, and it will, she'll be charged as an accessory." That broke through Big Jim's self-pity. His sister appeared then, a small woman with steel gray hair and Big Jim's stubborn jaw. "Let him in, Jimmy. It's time to stop running." They sat at a kitchen table covered with checkered cloth, incongruously domestic for such a conversation. Our riveter spread out his evidence, showing the web of corruption, the shell companies, the money trails. "You're their loose end, Jim. Soon as the heat dies down, you'll have an accident. Fall down some stairs, drive off a cliff, something tragic but final." Wednesday night brought the crisis everyone had been dreading. Our riveter was working late, helping the night crew remove another defective beam, when the emergency sirens started wailing. The sound cut through the darkness like the Banshee beam's scream, sending workers scrambling for information. The news came in fragments. The crane preparing for tomorrow's main cable lift had developed metal fatigue in its primary support arm. The inspection that should have caught it had been signed off by one of Big Jim's corrupted inspectors, now under indictment. The arm was bending, slowly but visibly, 30 tons of machinery threatening to topple onto the bridge deck where 20 men were working. Angelo's voice crackled over the radio. "Evacuate sections C through F immediately." But our riveter knew the math, had already calculated the arc of destruction if the crane fell. It would hit the temporary supports holding up the section where they'd just removed the defective beam. Without that beam, the supports were already stressed beyond safe limits. If the crane hit them, the entire section would collapse into the bay, taking the adjacent sections with it like dominoes.
He found Angelo at the emergency command post, face white with the same realization. "We can't evacuate in time," Angelo said. "The night shift on Section D, they're doing precision work all tied in. It'll take 20 minutes to get them clear. Crane'll go in 10, maybe 15. They stood for a moment. Two men who'd spent their lives building things, now watching destruction approach with mathematical certainty. Then our riveter said, "Unless we control the fall." The plan was insane, suicidal even. Use the remaining construction cables to create a net of sorts, guiding the crane's fall away from the vulnerable sections. It meant men working directly under the failing crane, attaching cables to its base while tons of metal groaned above them. Frank arrived, took one look at the situation, and crossed himself. "Tell Mary I love her," he said, then grabbed a cable spool. Tommy appeared, still bandaged from his beating. "You're not doing this without me." "You can barely walk." "Don't need to walk. Need to tie knots and not panic. I can do both." Dr. Whitman coordinated from below, using her engineering knowledge to calculate exact cable positions. 30 degrees northeast, she called out. "That'll put the fall into the empty staging area." They worked with desperate efficiency, our riveter and 5 volunteers, while above them the crane's arm bent another degree, metal shrieking its protest. Every sound made them flinch, expecting the final crack that would bring death. Angelo kept the radio open, broadcasting their progress to emergency crews gathering below. The Coast Guard had boats in the water. Fire department ladders extended uselessly toward heights they couldn't reach. And somewhere in the crowd of onlookers, newspaper photographers captured every moment. "Last cable," Frank called out, his voice steady despite the sweat pouring down his face. The crane gave a grinding lurch, dropping 6 inches. Someone screamed, but the cables held, redirecting the crane's weight, changing its center of gravity just enough. "Everyone off, now!" our riveter shouted. They rappelled down like circus performers. No time for safety protocols, just controlled falling and prayers to whatever gods might be listening. Our riveter went last, making sure everyone was clear, and had just hit the deck when the crane finally surrendered to gravity. The sound was apocalyptic. 30 tons of steel, falling 200 feet, cables snapping like guitar strings, the bridge itself groaning in sympathy. But the cables had done their job. The crane fell northeast, exactly as calculated, crushing the empty staging area, but missing the vulnerable sections by mere feet. In the silence that followed, someone started clapping. Then others joined, and soon the entire night shift was applauding, some crying with relief. Our riveter stood among them, shaking now that the danger had passed, thinking about how close they'd come to disaster. Thursday's newspapers called them heroes. The Chronicle ran a front-page photo of the 6 men standing beneath the failing crane. "Courage on the Bay," in massive headlines. But our riveter was more interested in the smaller story on page 3. Federal prosecutor James Dewey had announced a grand jury investigation into construction contract fraud, with James Morrison as the star witness. Big Jim had come through, providing documents he'd hidden as insurance, including recorded conversations with city councilmen discussing how to hide the steel substitution. The web was unraveling, powerful men scrambling for lawyers and alibis. Friday brought unexpected consequences. Senator Walsh, one of the shell company owners, held a press conference denouncing reckless workers who endangered the bridge project with their stunt.
He called for investigations into union agitation, foreign interference, even communist infiltration of the construction crews. "He's trying to change the narrative," Dr. Whitman observed over coffee. "Make you villains instead of heroes." But Angelo had anticipated this. By noon, he'd organized a counteroffensive. Workers' wives came forward with stories of their husbands' nightmares about the Banshee beam. Jerry Kowalski, on crutches, testified about his fall.
Tommy's mother, through an interpreter, described the men who'd beaten her son for asking questions. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Morrison, Big Jim's sister, held her own press conference at the ranch. She produced a letter Big Jim had written but never sent, detailing the entire conspiracy, naming names, listing bribes. She'd found it hidden in her barn, insurance he'd kept even from her. "My brother made terrible mistakes," she said to the cameras. "But these men forced him to choose between his family's survival and his conscience. The real criminals wear expensive suits and sit in government offices." Saturday, our riveter was called to Dewey's office in the federal building. The prosecutor looked exhausted, but triumphant. "We have enough for indictments. Walsh, 2 councilmen, half a dozen inspectors, and Patrick Morrison. They'll all face federal charges." "And Big Jim?" "He'll do time, but not much. 2 years, maybe 3, in minimum security." His cooperation earned him that. It seemed both too much and too little. But justice was never perfect, just better than injustice. That evening, the crew gathered at the Chen family restaurant, now thriving with customers drawn by Tommy's newfound fame. Our riveter sat quietly in the corner, watching his makeshift family celebrate their survival. Frank told exaggerated stories of their courage. Angelo planned union strategies. Tommy sketched bridge designs on napkins, already dreaming of the engineer he'd become. Dr. Whitman found him there, raised her glass of beer in silent toast. "You did it," she said. "Saved them all. We did it. Every person who spoke truth, who refused bribes, who risked everything for what was right," she smiled. "Spoken like a true philosopher. Ever consider that engineering is just applied philosophy? Finding truth through mathematics and metal?" Before he could answer, Elizabeth arrived, having heard about the crane incident. She hugged him fiercely, not caring who saw. "No more heroics," she whispered. "Promise me." He couldn't promise that, not honestly. There would always be another beam to test, another pattern to notice, another truth that needed telling. But for tonight, surrounded by survivors and friends, he could pretend the world was safe and solid as properly forged steel. 3 weeks had passed since the crane incident, and the bridge wore scaffolding like bandages where the defective beams had been removed. Our riveter stood on the newest section, running his hand along virgin steel that rang true and struck, that hummed contentedly in the wind instead of screaming. This was steel you could trust, steel that would outlast them all. The May morning was clear enough to see past Alcatraz to the Marin headlands, where the bridge's far anchor waited to be joined. They said it would take another year now, maybe 18 months with all the replacements and reinforcements. But it would be done right, built on foundations of truth, rather than compromised integrity. Tommy Chen was there, sporting a new apprentice engineer badge, courtesy of a federal program Dewey had pushed through for individuals instrumental in maintaining infrastructure integrity. Bureaucratic language for heroes who'd prevented disaster.
The kid was heading to Berkeley in the fall, full scholarship, his family's restaurant doing well enough to hire extra help. "You know what I learned from all this?" Tommy asked, checking measurements on the new beam connections. "What's that?" "That metal doesn't lie. It can be forced into shapes, heated, beaten, bent, but it always tells the truth about what it is. It's people who complicate things." Our riveter nodded. It was a lesson worth learning young. He'd taken 42 years to understand it fully himself. Frank Kowalski had been promoted to crew chief of Section C, Angelo's recommendation, backed by the new Federal Oversight Committee. He'd stopped carrying his wooden cross, said he'd found faith in something more immediate, the men beside him and the care they took with each other's lives. His cousin Jerry had found work as a safety inspector, his limp a daily reminder of the cost of silence. The trials had begun the previous week. Senator Walsh, defiant to the end, claiming he was a victim of union persecution. The councilmen, turning on each other like rats in a flooding hold. Patrick Morrison, silent and gray, looking older than his years. Our riveter had testified for 6 hours, his notebook evidence carrying more weight than all the lawyer's rhetoric. Big Jim Morrison had been sentenced to 3 years, eligible for parole in 18 months. He'd stood in court, looked directly at our riveter, and nodded once. Acknowledgement, maybe gratitude, certainly understanding. They were both men who'd made choices, lived with consequences. The difference was, Big Jim had chosen family over strangers, until forced to choose differently. Our riveter had never seen them as separate categories. Dr. Whitman had been appointed Chief Safety Inspector for the entire bridge project, the first woman to hold such a position. She'd implemented new testing procedures, including acoustic analysis of every beam before installation. The workers had taken to calling it listening for banshees, but they did it religiously, understanding now that supernatural fears often masked natural dangers. "I owe you an apology," she'd told our riveter the day of her appointment. "I thought you were just another suspicious worker when we first met. I didn't see the scientist in you." Not a scientist," he'd replied, "just someone who pays attention." Same thing, different vocabulary. Old Pete had written from Petaluma, including a photograph of himself surrounded by chickens, looking happier than he'd ever seemed on steel. His testimony via deposition had been crucial in locating Big Jim, in establishing the pattern of corruption. He'd ended his letter with, "The chickens don't scream, thank God. They just cluck and give eggs. It's a good trade." Elizabeth had started at Catherine Gibbs the previous Monday, coming home that first evening glowing with excitement about shorthand and typing speeds and the mathematics of business accounting. She'd inherited his eye for patterns, his need to understand how things fit together. But she'd also inherited Margaret's warmth, her ability to see people as more than problems to solve. "I'm proud of you, Papa," she'd said over dinner that first night. "Not for the heroics, but for the everyday courage, for going back each day even when you knew it was dangerous, for caring about men who probably never knew your name." She was wrong about that last part. After the crane incident, everyone knew his name. But he'd ask them to forget it, to go back to seeing him as just another riveter, another man doing his job. Fame was uncomfortable, made him visible in ways that interfered with observation. Better to be forgotten, to blend back into the crew, to watch and listen and notice. The new beams were performing beautifully. No screams, no cracks, no hidden fractures waiting to fail. The bridge was growing again, reaching across the bay like humanity's handshake with the future. Sometimes our riveter would stand at its edge, looking at the gap still to be closed, and think about connection. How rivers were joined by bridges, how lies were joined to truth by conscience, how past was joined to future by the choices made in present moments. Angelo found him there one afternoon, standing at the leading edge of construction. "Philosophical thoughts?" the Italian asked, lighting a cigarette. "Wondering what we're really building?" "A bridge. 6 lanes of traffic, sidewalks for pedestrians, maybe a rail line if the city council approves." "No," our riveter said. "We're building trust. Every rivet says, you can cross here safely. Every beam says, I'll hold your weight." That's what Big Jim and the others violated, not just construction codes, but trust itself. Angelo exhaled smoke into the bay wind. "Trust and verify. That's what my father used to say. Old Russian proverb he learned from a chess player." Wise man. He was a stonecutter. Different material, same principle. You can't build anything lasting on a false foundation. The whistle blew for shift change. Men began climbing down from their positions, heading for the ferry, for home, for evening meals with families who'd sleep better knowing the bridge was being built right. Our riveter stayed a moment longer, hand on the new steel, feeling its solid truth through his work gloves. Tomorrow, he'd be back, driving rivets, checking joints, watching for patterns that didn't fit. There would be other challenges, there always were in projects this vast, but they'd face them with eyes open, voices ready to speak truth, courage to act when action was needed. He thought about Margaret, how she'd have understood all of this without explanation. She'd known his nature, his need to fix what was broken, to true what was false. "You can't help yourself," she'd said once, watching him repair a neighbor's fence without being asked. "You see something wrong, and you have to make it right. It's who you are." The sun was setting now, painting the bay gold and crimson. The incomplete bridge cast its shadow on the water, a promise of connection not yet fulfilled, but certain as tomorrow's sunrise. Our riveter finally turned away, joining the stream of workers heading home. At the boarding house, Mrs. Henley had kept dinner warm, pot roast with potatoes, simple food for a simple man who'd done complicated things. He ate alone, but not lonely, surrounded by the sounds of life, radio music from upstairs, children playing in the street, the distant horn of a ship heading out to sea. Later, he sat at his desk, opening a fresh notebook, beginning new observations. Because the bridge would be finished someday, but there would always be patterns to notice, truth to distinguish from deception, structures that needed someone to verify their integrity. He wrote carefully, precisely, recording the day's measurements, the performance of the new steel, the small adjustments still needed. It was mundane work, nothing heroic about it, but heroes were only needed when ordinary vigilance failed. Better to be the man who prevented crises than the one who solved them. Outside his window, San Francisco settled into evening, lights twinkling like ground-level stars. Somewhere, Tommy was studying engineering texts. Frank was helping his children with homework. Angelo was planning tomorrow's work. Dr. Whitman was reviewing safety reports. All of them connected now, not just by shared dangers survived, but by shared understanding of what mattered. The bridge would stand for generations, our riveter knew, long after everyone forgot the Banshee beam, the crane collapse, the trials and revelations. The bridge would endure. Children not yet born would cross it daily, never knowing how close it came to being built on lies. But some structures were invisible and even more permanent.
the bonds between men who'd faced death together, the knowledge that ordinary people could stand against powerful corruption, the proof that truth, spoken steadily and clearly, could overcome even the strongest deception. These were the real foundations, stronger than steel, more lasting than stone. And our riveter, unnamed and content to remain so, had helped lay them true.